Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session here at Data Champions Online Europe. Really nice to see some familiar names logging in from yesterday and Monday's session. So we have already had, as I mentioned, some excellent sessions from Anwar Mirza, Global Head of Data Governance at TNT. That was on Monday. And yesterday we had Eric Tyree, CTO, Chief Data Scientist at Wagonlit Travel. Today's going to follow exactly the same trend. So before I kick off, I just wanted to run through a few points on the housekeeping. So as always, we will be stopping at the end for a quick 10-minute Q&A. So please do submit your questions during the presentation or at the end in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your live view. In addition, this session will be recorded and we will be shooting out the on-demand link early next week. So please do look out for that. So without further ado, for our first session, we're going to be investigating operationalizing analytics to extract full value from insights. We are joined by an excellent speaker, Ferd Scheepers, who is the Global Chief Information Architect at ING. Ferd is responsible for driving ING's journey to becoming a data-driven company. Ferd has published reports on data lakes and is a frequent speaker on both major vendor conferences and open source summits. Currently, he is championing Ageria, the open metadata initiative. Passionate about data, both opportunities and risks, Ferd loves to share his vision and ideas on what data will mean for both companies and individuals. So before I hand over to Ferd, I just want to kick off with a quick polling question for our audience. So the first question is, has analytics and AI lived up to the promise? Yes, no, too early to tell. Just going to let everyone vote on that for a couple of seconds. So has analytics and AI lived up to the promise? Yes, no, too early to tell. Please cast your votes. Let's have a look at the results now. Wow. Looks like everyone believes it's a bit too early to tell. So yeah, without further ado, Ferd, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Jessel. So indeed, Ferd Scheepers, I'm the Chief Information Architect at ING, also responsible for all the group functions of ING from an architectural perspective. I've been working in the space of data and analytics for about 7 years. And what I want to tell you about is the journey we've gone through. I may not have all the answers, but I definitely can share some of the experiences we have and some of the insights we got from our journey and some of the things that for us have meant success and definitely also where we failed. And I probably would agree with the answer. It is too early to tell, but some of the things that I see that it is a struggle to get AI and analytics in production. And that is definitely where I want to spend some time on. But I want to start with the reason why we are actually doing analytics. And I just shamelessly stole something from Gartner where they talk about the 3 reasons people make decisions or companies make decisions. It's typically fear, faith, or fact. And what I see is that too many companies really base their decisions on either fear, what's the risk, can I get caught, should I be worried about something, let's be very defensive, let's make sure we don't screw up, or on faith, I believe this will be the right answer, I believe when we do this we will actually make more profit. But very, very little decisions are actually made on facts. And for me, analytics is really the way to go from, data to facts and base your decisions on that. And that's very much the driver for looking at, moving to an analytics organization, because else you keep with fear and faith, but facts do require you to be in control of what you're actually looking at, of the models that you're using and the data that you're using. So about 8 years ago, when I started on this journey of working on the data landscape, it was the peak of the big data hype, and the very simple promise of, big data and Hadoop was, you build this beautiful environment, throw in all your data. You don't really have to know what the data is. Just throw it in there, and then you get these magic workers, these data scientists, and they start figuring out all the problems of the bank, and they will just kind of like do their magical thing, and answers will just come out of your data lakes. Actually, even quite some vendors were preaching the same kind of message. I remember it's about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I was at a big conference of IBM, and they were preaching about Watson. And it was really about preaching almost. It almost felt like a religious experience. Trust us, we have this amazing box, and all your data, and we'll let Watson figure it out. And now we're in the area of cognitive systems, and the magic box will just figure all out, and answers will come out of the box. And of course, each time everybody tried it, and I hope most of you recognize that promise just didn't come true. Because there is no magic solution to getting your analytics done. There is no magical set of people. There are no wizards that can, with a wave of a stick, get the answers out of the mess of data that you have. You actually have to go through a process. So we actually took a decision as ING about 7 years ago to do something completely different. We really felt that in order to get data driven, we really needed to start managing our data better and really build a system, a landscape that focused on understanding our data, bringing it together, and from there go to the journey towards analytics. And when we looked at our landscape at that point in time, so you see that beautiful picture in the middle, which is actually, at the best of our knowledge, a single process of a single country. So it's actually the fast close process of Belgium as we had it in 2012. And if you look at this landscape, and the fact that we have such a beautiful picture with all the lines in there already is quite remarkable, because I don't think there's anybody in the organization that could draw that picture and understand all these connections. That's already the work of many people coming together and trying to document things. But if you bring this to your regulators and you say, hey, listen, this is our landscape. All is well. We're in control. Nobody will buy it. I mean, this is just too complex to be able to claim that you're in control. At the same time, we knew a lot of the regulations that were coming. You have to think this was 2012. BCBS 239 was still far away on the horizon. GDPR was not yet a big item as it is today, or as it was a few years ago when we all were scrambling to get that done. We really wanted to make sure that whatever architecture we built directly took care of these future requirements that we have. But at the same time, there was Hadoop, and we had to take that into account, because if I told my CIO at that point in time, I want to, travel to talk about data governance, he told me, governance, we don't do governance anymore. It's not a sexy word. It's a 4-letter word, but it's not same as sexy. Real time was around the corner. Big data was around the corner. Those were the things that CIOs were interested to talk about. So we definitely brought these things into our architecture. But without telling anybody, we built an architecture that was very much governance-centric, because we knew we had to build an architecture that supported the different roles that we need to have around data. We needed to be able to make sure that when we implement CDO roles, data steward roles, all these roles in the bank, they have a set of tools that they can work with. They can understand where the data is. They can understand what the data means. They can actually have a simple UI to work with. That was very much the focus of the architecture that we built. So what did we build? Well, we called it the ING Data Lake architecture. And this is a box or a picture of many boxes actually, that everybody within ING will recognize. It's hanging on many people's walls. It's a rather complex architecture, has many components, but it's very, very comprehensive. And we didn't completely do this by ourselves. We actually worked together very much with IBM to build this, for two really good reasons. First of all, being an architect for quite some years already, I've built beautiful architectures. They look beautiful, just like this one, hanging on the wall. They look amazing. Lots of boxes, lots of arrows, colors, all looks good. Doesn't mean you can always build them. By having a vendor like IBM work with us and actually challenging us on whether the architecture that we've drawn up could actually be realized with tools that exist today or tomorrow, I have that balance between dreaming up a beautiful conceptual architecture and something that can actually be realized. Second reason was that we were, in that time, actually working together with IBM on a more partnership relationship rather than the traditional vendor, customer relationship, which in essence means every 3 years you fight about the price. At the end of the fight, you pay a bit more for everything you can consume, and then 3 years later you go through the same rhythm again. Working together on such a space in a more partnership model was something that we were trying out, and working on data was for us the best place to actually do that. So this is something we have designed, we've built, we've rolled out, and that is now globally our architecture for anything around data at ING. We've got 17 of these data lakes now in production. They are all built using the same technology stack, mostly based on IBM tools, but also some other tools in there. And a lot of data of ING is flowing through these data lakes. But selling these data lakes was quite an uphill battle. I mean, it cost me, I think, 7 years of my life to get this, explained again, argued whether it was the right thing to do, get the money for it. Main reason that actually we got it done, well, I used actually the fear factor a little bit. So even though I want you to think about fact-based decisions, when possible, it's always good to use a little bit of fear, because explaining to people that if you don't do it, you're in trouble, that you need to be in control of your regulated data, that all of these things that we have to send to our regulators have to have full lineage. BCPS 339 demands it. It really helps you in getting such an architecture done and rolled out and working. But as we were very much focused on those regulatory aspects of implementing a data infrastructure, all around us, these little initiatives kept popping up. And, I've just put a few names of very creative names of initiatives out there that we have within the bank. Because, over the last few years, analytics became rather sexy, and every country, every little unit wanted to have their own little analytical platform where you can just play around. You install some open source tooling, you put some data in there, you get your data scientists to work with it, and it's fun. It's engineers love to build these environments, data scientists love to play with the data, and it's all great. And what we've built really uses many of the the technologies that you would expect. There is a lot of open source stuff in there. Everybody's working, with streaming data to Kafka. We have chosen to work with Flink for streaming analytics, with Spark for, different things. Look at the picture out there. You will recognize all of the beautiful tools that data scientists love to work with. And we've got many of these. I know at least of 15, and probably I don't know all of them, of these little and sometimes large implementations in ING, where a lot of data, flows into, and we build a lot of models, and a lot of data scientists are working with it, and they're building beautiful stuff. But it's really, really been hard for us to put these models in production, because these environments are very much focused on getting data in, having data scientists work with this data, building beautiful stuff, coming up with beautiful hypotheses. And what's next? How do I put it in production? Well, I actually didn't think about needing to have that data flow in on a regular basis to run these models, because, hey, I just got my data on a memory stick, or somebody sent me a file over email. And, I did a lot of manipulations with that data. So when I get the raw data again, I actually have to do a lot of preparations on that data before I can actually run my model. And nobody's there to build that. And actually, maybe I don't know exactly what I did in all the different steps, because there was a few people working together and there was an old data set, and actually I got it for something else, and it was maybe already a little bit manipulated. And I don't really have any way to put that in production. It's quite a challenge, especially if people then ask you, well, can you actually explain what this model is doing? Very tough. Do you actually know what kind of data it's really using? Yeah, I know what goes in there, but can I really explain based on what the model is actually deciding left or right? So big focus on, having data scientists play with data. Very limited focus for most of these models on making sure that you can actually put stuff in production, that you can put it in production so that you can explain what is going on with the models, and that you have some governance around these models. Definitely a big gap in many of those platforms that we have today. And then being a global bank as we are, we would actually love to have these models scalable across the different countries. And as you look at how typically these models get built, so you have your system of record, you bring in a lot of raw data into some kind of platform. From there, you start developing a model. You have your data scientists play with that, and then ideally you want to execute that model, hopefully on that same data or similar data coming from such a system of record, and then have a result. That by itself is tough enough. But if you now want to actually, copy that model into a different country, it's really tough because they have a different platform, maybe even using some different tools, or maybe it's the same tools, but at least they're installed in a different way. The data coming from that system of record is different. It might even be a different core banking system, or maybe it's the same core banking system, but this data is just slightly different. And even if you manage to solve that, and you make your data transformations, and you kind of like take these things into account, and you make sure that there is a mapping in between, actually, that model was never trained on that data coming from that other country. So the result of that model may not be applicable to the data coming from that country. It's really, really hard to scale based on such an environment as we've built around analytics today. So what I've observed over the last few years that, in the market, there is now a different way of looking at how you actually do analytics. But a few years ago, it was really around, data scientists, they know everything. You just, have this big bucket, you throw in the data, magic happens. Now, a lot of companies, definitely the bigger vendors out there, but I actually also start seeing it more and more in the open source world. If you see how Cloudera is now looking at their data platform compared to a few years ago, it's a big change, and I think it was very well articulated by Rob Thomas, who's the general manager of data and analytics in IBM. Well, a few years ago, he was one of the guys saying, this information architecture is all bullshit, data scientist, and magic happens. Now he is the person that really says, there is no AI without IA. There is no AI without information architecture. And actually, you have to go to a certain maturity ladder, what they call the AI ladder, to be able to get the true value out of AI. There is a number of steps you have to take before you get there. Now, maybe for people on the call, it'd be good to give your answer. How do you think that your organization is ready around kind of the architecture and the governance around data? Do you feel that you're very much advanced in there, you're getting there, or you're actually lagging behind a bit? Give you a few seconds to fill in how you think you are doing there. So this is going to be the first time that I do an online poll and actually try to see the results, so hopefully we'll get there. Let's see. Oh, that's an interesting one. So half the people are very advanced and half the people are behind the curve. And okay, interesting. Like to see later in the questions where people kind of like reflect to where they are in this space, because I expect very different questions from the different audiences then. So What we did at ING is we devised our own maturity ladder when it comes to kind of like executing on this dream of being a data-driven organization. Where traditionally, when you have no maturity, you have your data in your systems, and you create data. It's a process that takes place in a system, and your data is hidden in that system. The first step that most people have taken is what we call data liberation. You take your data out of the system, you put it in a data warehouse, a data lake, whatever you want to call it. It means that you need to start governing that data outside of the system, because in the system it was all safe, but now all of a sudden you need to understand what that data means, because else you can't start using it. It means you have your data owners in place, you have your roles in place, maybe a CDO in place, you start standardizing maybe the definitions of your data, and you bring your atomic data under governance. And you need to have a number of foundational components in place. In the next step, when you start thinking about what you really do with that data, why did something happen, you start using more intelligence. So we call that phase business intelligence. And it really talks about when you start combining data, you bring that also under governance, and you allow people to start combining data themselves. You give them self-service BI capabilities, let them play with the data a little bit. You have some standard tooling in place that makes sure that you can actually govern that derived data very well. You bring ETL under governance. You make sure you have your full lineage across that aggregation. Next step, and then it becomes really interesting, is what we call the predictive analytics or AI phase. Now we start to understand what will happen. We start thinking about the future. And now we start using these predictive models. But these models now have to be brought under governance, meaning that all of a sudden we can no longer depend on these playground little platforms where everybody can do what they want. No, you have to actually have a way of governing what people do with data, what they start using the exploration environments for, bringing these models under governance, but also bringing that outcome of these models, again, under a form of governance so people can actually use that outcome to base their decisions upon. Ideally, at some point in time, we really want to go even a step further. We would really like the analytics to determine, or at least give a good advice on what we should be doing. And then we're truly in the phase where we start making business decisions based on facts. And for us, ideally, but this is pretty much the nirvana of data and analytics for me, we really want to start asking questions to the data rather than having tools that let us play with the data. So I'd ideally see my CIO, or actually even my CEO, coming in the morning and just ask, hey data, how many new customers did we get last night? Or how many customers did Germany acquire over the last 2 months? Or even better, a predictive analytical question or prescriptive, what should I do to get more customers in Germany? And if you actually can get an answer to that with a certain kind of understanding of where that answer is based upon, that it can explain why it came to a certain conclusion, then I think we really reached that nirvana. It does mean, if we want to take all these steps, that we have to have clear roles defined in the business that go further than what we traditionally have. I think one of the biggest things that I focus on is we really need to understand who owns the problem when we start doing analytics. So I see a lot of analytics, a lot of AI taking place, playing with data, coming to a beautiful result. We have a beautiful model, but nobody truly understands who owns the problem. If you don't know who owns the problem, whose problem are you solving? What is it doing? Why is this so important? Who is actually going to pay for this? Who needs to have this run? Who wants to spend money on this? Some roles I think all of you will have. I mean, you will have roles around data ownership. For us, it's very much at the moment on atomic data. We know atomically who owns the data. But the moment we start combining data and we bring it together, those roles are not that well defined. Same as data definitions. We have what we call our ING Esperanto. We have a common set of terms that we want to use across the globe. Around 2,000 terms have now been defined. Most of those are rather atomic. these compound terms, these derived data terms, still a little bit lacking behind. We have data engineers in the bank, for sure. We already do that for a long time. We have some data scientists, but the role of model owner is not been very well defined. Some of these roles, both in the IT and the business, we need to have really, really clear before we can actually start getting the full, benefits out of doing analytics. Next is really starting to standardize your platform. So where we now have many different little islands of analytics within the bank, we are focusing on bringing everything together in that architecture that I described before, which until now for ING has been pretty much used only for the regulatory domain. We are now bringing all of our analytics back into this platform because we have all the data there. So it makes a lot of sense. After we've done all the regulatory work, we've put hundreds of sources into this data lake. We've described hundreds, thousands of business terms. We know the data. We know the data quality, know where the data is, what it means. This is an ideal ground for having your data scientists play with it and start getting the value out of it, and also bringing those model execution capabilities on top of that data that resides in the data lake anyways, and running it there, rather than copying that data over to yet another platform where, we need to bring the data to, we need to bring our model. It's just replication of data. It doesn't make any sense. So for us, now we have our data lake with all the data in there. Bringing the analytics to the data is the right next step. Then the next thing, which is really important, is we do need to start standardizing the data that we bring into these models. So where you have data coming from multiple countries, let's say you have an account management system, a core bank system, and you actually are able to map those to a standardized data language. You bring them into your environment, it's raw data, you start mapping it to a standardized language. As I said before, we call it the ING Esperanto. If you can actually develop your models on that Esperanto and actually execute against that Esperanto, not only do you have that single environment where you can run all your data and all your analytics, you also have that single language, meaning that your model can actually be executed against the data of any country. And because you have a combined data set that has data from the different countries, your model is actually also trained on the different data sets. And whether you then actually execute that model on individual data sets of individual countries, because that's the best way to do it, or you actually execute it against a compound data set of all the data of all countries, that really depends on, the use case and what makes sense in this specific situation. But making sure that you have that, data standardization, that one language, that mapping to a single data model so that you can reuse your models, it is the only way to scale. If you don't do that, you will be stuck with local models. You can't scale. Every little problem in every little country or every little domain will have its own model, and there is no scalability. And that is really making the AI really costly. I don't think we can afford it. I know we as a company can't. It does come with a challenge because many times when data scientists start working with new data to figure out are there new answers to the problem, that data has not been mapped yet to that standardized set of business terms. Often they start working with raw data, and they start figuring out over time that, on top of the data that we're already using to solve a problem, if we were just to combine a few more data points into that model, if we just add a few more attributes to the data set that we run the model against, we could do way better things. But that's interesting because now I've built my model on data that is not yet standardized, but I still want to execute it on that standardized data set. So the moment I start bringing these models into production, in parallel, I now also need to focus on getting my data mapped to that standardized model. And that brings a dependency in there, which is rather hard to manage. I definitely see that within our organization. Instead of just having a data scientist team that needs to transfer their knowledge to a data engineering team or a model engineering team, we also need to find people that actually start standardizing that data. They agree on the business terms. They put that as part of our enterprise data model. I need to start mapping those raw data elements to this, so somebody has to build the ETL. it's a lot of coordination to getting models into production. And this is one of the trickiest problems to solve. How do you actually make sure that there's not too many teams involved, that those teams can work together in an agile way, that there is not kind of like a dependency where, you have to get it on the backlog of so many teams, they're not coordinated, etc. It really means those teams have to sit together in a tribe, they have to work together, they need to be able to put things on each other's backlog, and you really have to drive it from an epic perspective. This is an epic that many teams have to work on, or a feature. It's the only way to get it solved, and even then it's challenging. One of the big things that we focus on is making sure that all the models that we develop now are really brought under governance. So if you have a standard ETL job, you bring it under governance. If you have standard rules, everybody understands them. But if you have a model which actually evolves over time, which uses a lot of data, what it's based upon, you really have to understand what that model does. And you really have to understand when that model was built, by whom, on which data it was trained. You have to understand what time, which model was put in production. You have to understand the model risk in that model. You have to understand model bias. You ideally want to have model explainability. All that means is that you really need to have a very mature practice around putting models into production. I mean, there's good tools out there. There's open source stuff. There is a few vendors that have really rich tools. But just putting your Python model or your R model in production, hoping that it's all fine, and not having it under governance, not having it under version management, it is just a huge risk. Because at some point in time, your regulators will ask you, can you prove what you were doing at that point in time? And if you can't, you're in trouble. And if they ask you, can you prove what that model is doing, and you have no idea, you don't even know what the data was trained upon, whether there's bias in there, it's actually up to us to prove that we did the right thing, rather up to other people, our customers, to prove that we did the wrong thing. And we take this really serious. A lot of the stuff we do, we're a financial institute, is very, very much under scrutiny. I think everybody is aware of the magnifying glass that banks are under. Model governance is essential. We spend a lot of money on making sure that all our models, not just our risk models, but also our AML models, also our marketing models, our models that determine whether you get a certain interest rate. All these things need to be very, very well governed. It's a big driver for us. Very important for us is also that we focus on making sure that the full flow of data, and that also includes what data models is trained upon, but also how models are actually part of that full, I would call almost supply chain of data, how they work in there, that is brought under a single view of Lineage. And traditionally that is quite a challenge. So if you have multiple technologies in your data landscape, if you're lucky, they come with a form of Lineage. If you're not lucky, they have nothing. If you have a lot of those open source tools and you execute a data transformation in Spark, there is hardly any Lineage. I mean, if you're good, you have documentation, but really truly seeing what is happening is quite tough. Luckily, a lot of vendors are now focusing on getting that under control, but I want to see it across everything. Meaning I want to see where my data gets ingested. I want to understand all the ETL steps. I want to see when it comes in streaming. I want to see where my model picks up data and actually outputs data. I want to see what that model was doing. I want to have a reference to which version of that model was executed. I want to have a reference to which data set that model was trained upon, all in a single place. And for that, actually, we as ING have decided to work together with IBM and SAS, and now also with Cloudera and a few others, to work on something we call open metadata, which is part of ODPI. It's a project called Egeria, and we are building an overlay over multiple metadata management solutions to make sure we have this end-to-end view on our data through the lens of metadata, and we also can see the lineage across all these different technologies end-to-end, which is quite an interesting journey, but it's already given us a lot of value. The fact that we can combine multiple technologies together and we can bridge that gap between the different technology stacks is very valuable. And just being able to show that full lineage in such a way that your regulators can just come in and say, everything here is not documentation, it is reality, and I can prove it, is very powerful. So I agreed that I would keep it at 35 minutes, and I think I perfectly did that. So for us, key message is this is a journey. You can't just say, I have nothing today and I want to be in control of my analytics tomorrow. You have to go through the journey of
Hello, Ferd. Just to everyone in the audience, I think Ferd's connection has just dropped, so I'm just going to drop him a couple of messages. Now, just please do bear with us. Right, guys, I think we actually lost Ferd a little bit prematurely, so I know if there was any questions that we wanted to get to, please do submit them into the Q&A function at the bottom of on the right-hand side of the interface, and hopefully we will be able to get back to them afterwards. Let me just pop him another message to see if we can get him back online. So yeah, unfortunately, I think we have lost Ferd. But before we go, I did wanted to just make everyone aware on the line that our next event will be the Chief Data Analytics Officer UK, which will be taking place in February on the 11th to 12th at the Park Plaza, London. You are able to download the agenda to that to see the speaker lineup. There's also what sessions we're going to be covering. In addition to the agenda, we have a transformational data strategy report, which is underneath that, which is some research we did in the lead up to the event. And we've also pinned our global events calendar. So along with any online events that we're doing, there'll be a full list of our global events that we do across the US, Europe, Asia Pac and Africa as well. So tomorrow we are going to be kicking off slightly earlier at 2 p.m. GMT as it's our final day. We've got a double session tomorrow. We're going to be covering why data culture matters, creating a culture of data. Ferd, you're back in. Excellent, excellent. Right, guys, I'm just going to dive. No problem at all. No problem at all. Let's dive into the Q&A because we did have a few questions. So I think it'd be good to get to those. All right, I'm just going to dive straight in. Ferd, the first question we had was, and I think it kind of alluded to one of your polls earlier, was how much time does it take to reach the highest maturity level?
I would say that we've been spending a few years on this now, about 7 years, starting with drawing this out and starting this journey. And I still think we need a few more years. But I don't think that's representative of somebody starting today and really wanting to do this, because I think given all the learnings that are out there, you can do it way faster. And it also would depend on the size of your organization. I'd say if you really have your buy-in from senior management, and if this is really something you want to do as an organization, you can do it way faster, but it's still going to be a multi-year journey. You can't do it in a few weeks or a few months. That's just impossible, and you really need to hang in there. I mean, you do need to have a champion that, it drives this, that has support from the board, that doesn't promise these low-hanging fruits that, are always interesting to talk about, but rarely really exist. You have to hang in there and you have to build it out, and it will take you a few years.
Okay. Right. So our next question from the audience is asking, could you elaborate a little bit on how you work with Lineage? So business lineage, technical lineage, abstracting lineage to make it understandable.
Sure. So what we do is actually, as part of our Jira project, we capture the different lineage components from different tools. And we do that on the level of technical lineage. So we understand data set, transformation, new data set. But of course, because everything we have in our data lake is brought under governance, we know actually on attribute level which business term describes which attribute. So in our situation, if you want to find out where, for example, customer name is being used, you can go from the customer name to the assets that are about customer name, and from there you can get the full lineage, including seeing all the business terms that we use. It also is something in Germany maybe has been called as Kundenname, or in the Netherlands a klantnaam. That full business lineage, including all the transformation on column level, that we bring together across multiple technologies. And we actually did that by storing that in a graph database, making it really fast to traverse through that graph database and seeing many things visually, like, where does the data come from, the ultimate source, or where does the data go to, the ultimate destination, all the steps in between, all the transformations, very much focused on making sure that it's consumable by business people. It has its role in the technical landscape as well, especially to fix problems. But really understanding where your business users want to focus on. It's on, where's my data coming from? Is it from the ultimate source? Is it the right source? Is it the golden master? Where does it go to? Who's consuming my data? Oh, that's interesting. I see somebody consuming my customer data. I wasn't even aware of that. And it's more than just in my data lake. It's also in my streaming platform. It's in my APIs. All of that for us is part of Lineage, and we are capturing, well, at least we're busy capturing all of that.
Okay, perfect. So a couple more questions from the audience there. The next one I wanted to get to is, do you see data and analytics as part of IT or an independent function in the CDO office?
That's a really interesting one. So when we started out many years ago, I started this as part of IT. And it was always clear to me that the ownership of data can never be in IT. So that's for me a given. Data is owned by the business. We don't own data. Well, we own the IT data, log data of systems, but the real business data, customer data is of course owned by the business. I do see that there is such a big component around managing data, making sure your data gets transported in the right way, stored in the right way, getting your models in production, optimizing for performance, that I do think that it makes a lot of sense to have your data function very, very close to your IT function. So in our current setup at ING, the head of technology, our global CIO, is also the boss of the chief data officer of ING. But the chief data officer doesn't sit within IT. He does sit on the business side, but he sits really close to the IT side. And they do work together hand in hand. And I'm, for example, part of the management team of our global chief data officer. And I have a big say in deciding how data flows, what technologies. Well, I have actually a veto on which technologies we use. So it really goes closely hand in hand. But the ownership of the data, the definitions of the data, those things definitely for me are business roles.
Okay, perfect. So next question. Would it be possible to elaborate further on the prerequisite to have a single standardized platform for data analytics? Would it not depend significantly on the use case?
So when I say a single platform, I don't per se mean a single technology stack. And maybe that would take away a bit of the worry. Our platform has quite some technology components in there. For example, we do real-time streaming data analytics with Apache Flink. When it comes to micro batches, we use a lot of Spark. When it comes to other components, we use different things. We have SAS still in our data lake because we have a big credit risk function. We also run Python models and R models. We definitely have multiple technology components as part of that platform. The main reason I stress that it needs to be one platform is that for every use case out there, I want them to use those standard technology stacks because it's the only way I can actually scale this across country boundaries. There's so many different technologies out there. I mean, literally, if you watch what's happening in the analytics space, I could find a new company, a new technology stack to play with every week. If I allow that to happen within an organization as ING, I will have any component out there for any kind of use case. I will never have any reusability. I will never have any lineage. I need to focus on a limited set of technologies. I need to be able to make that work for different use cases. I need to be able to scale that across all the countries, and I need to be able to govern and manage that. So not one single technology stack, but multiple technologies as part of a single platform. That's my answer to it.
Perfect. So just one final question before we wrap up. You were talking a lot about the journey today. What's the biggest learning you've had on your journey?
Biggest learning, I would say, is that it really is a journey that you have to stick with and that you have to drive, and you need to have a champion for the journey. I've seen other organizations starting on a similar journey, maybe even together with us, and it got lost when the person that really drove it took on a different role, and it started to be rediscussed. You need to have a champion, and it's perfect if that champion is kind of like your CEO or your CIO, but have a champion that sticks with it, that really rides the journey, well, almost to the end, I'd say, at least until the moment that it's so embedded in the organization that there is no way back anymore, because it does depend on personal leadership. This is a tough cookie. This is not easy. A lot of people can get burned in this journey. You have to stick with it. You have to drive it. You have to pull it until the end, and you have to accept that the moment it's all gone, it's somebody else's idea, because success has many fathers. But at least that you did all the work, and it's at least to a certain extent your success.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, Ferd, thank you so much for the presentation today. It's been really, really useful. And I did just want to go to the audience again. I know I did mention, pulled up some information earlier about our next couple of events that we're going to be running, but I just wanted to mention about tomorrow, which is our final day for Data Champions. We're going to have 2 sessions tomorrow, so we're going to be kicking off slightly earlier at 2 p.m. The theme for tomorrow's day is why data culture matters, creating a culture of data to drive organizational change. I just wanted to once again thank Ferd for today's presentation and everyone who's joined us on the call. We will be shooting out a link to the on-demand session next week, so please do look out for that. Thank you to everyone, and if there's any other questions, please do email in and we will try to respond to you as quickly as possible. Thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.